Hey, happy Friday. Welcome back to another Friday Tech Workshop. I'm Joseph, a senior developer advocate with Appsmith. And this week, we're going to build a custom AI chatbot that you can self-host using Cohere AI. Cohere is the leading LLM for enterprises. It's open source, and it can be self-hosted with Docker or Kubernetes in AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, or Oracle, right next to your Appsmith instance. This means the LLM can securely access your company's data without it ever leaving your network. Let's get started by checking out the Cohere API docs for the chat endpoint. All right, first we're going to check out the playground. So if you just log into Cohere, set up a free account, and go to your dashboard, and then from here, check out the playground. And this will let you test out all the different functionality before you integrate through the API. Now, it's got this extra under the hood feature that's pretty cool. It shows you the exact APIs that are being ran in the background. So you can use the interface to pick what tools you want, what options you want to enable, and then send that request. And you're interacting and using it live, but you can also look at the API that was used and then copy this as an example to go build that in the next app. So it's a pretty cool feature. I think it's really developer friendly the way that they've set this up. And it's even showing the tokens that were used here so you can get an idea of pricing once you go to deploy this in production. So let's look at the API docs now. I just wanted to show this interface on the playground and the under the hood thing here first. You can get your API key as soon as you log in. You'll already have this trial key created, and it's rate limited, but it is free. You'll want to upgrade and get a production key when you're done building, but this should be enough to at least get you started. So you can copy your key right here, and then we'll go to the API docs, API reference here. So there's several different endpoints, pretty common stuff you'd see in any of the AIs today. But the interesting thing is that their chat endpoint, it's really flexible and it eliminates the need for separate assistants. Now, if you've seen my other videos on OpenAI to create an assistant, there's first creating the assistant in the OpenAI dashboard. And then once it's created, it's still 4 different APIs to create a thread, add a message to the thread, run the thread, and then check the messages on the thread, just to carry on a chat with that specific trained model, that particular agent instead of just the basic chat. Well, with Cohere, they have a chat endpoint, and if you don't enable any of those other options, then it's just like the regular chat endpoint in OpenAI. But there's all these different optional properties that you can include that enable other features and basically give you the same experience, the same tools that the OpenAI assistant does with a single endpoint. Like all you have to do is send a post request and it replies with the answer. There's no creating a thread and getting back an ID and juggling that back and forth. It's dead simple. And there's just a bunch of things that are optional. So you can see the message is required, which is your message right then, the one that you're currently sending. But then you can also optionally send a chat history. So if you wanted to kind of resume a chat that you've queued up and manually typed out, with the background info, you can do that. The OpenAI assistant has the special instructions that you give to each model. Rather than having to set that up ahead of time, you can just do it on demand here with a role of, there's a preamble. So it's similar to the OpenAI's instructions that you give it before a chat happens. You have the role of user and chatbot, but then you can also throw in that preamble if you want. And then there's connectors, which will enable you to search the web or use other tools. You can also lock it down to one specific website. So it's still able to use the web search, but then it's grounded to data from that one particular domain. So it's pretty cool, easy to use, really enjoying it so far. So today we're going to build a chat app that uses this one endpoint here. And I'm going to keep it simple and just be able to ask it a message and get something back. If you want to enable all these extra options, you can do a ton of stuff through this one endpoint. And instead of using the, where is it, the model here, it'll default to their most current updated model that was just released. You can also give it one of the previous models or one of the lower powered, cheaper ones if you want, or you can give it the idea of a fine-tuned model. So it's similar to having that pre-trained agent like in OpenAI, but you don't have to send 4 different API requests to interact with it. It's still just the one chat endpoint. So I really like how they've set this up, if you can't tell. All right, so I'm going to copy this curl request here for the chat. And we'll head over to Appsmith. I have a blank app here, nothing in it yet. So I'm going to create a new data source, actually a new API, not a data source yet. Going to import that curl request. So this will save you a little bit of time of filling out every individual field. You can just import it like this. You'll want to swap out your bearer token right here. So we'll go back and grab that from the API key here. Okay, and I'm just going to name it. Now that should be all we need. It's got the authentication, the body here for this particular chat. So this should give us something back. Let's try it. And you may need to increase the timeout. The default is 10 seconds, which it tends to be a little too short, just a few seconds too short, but I'm going to bump it up to 60. I don't think we'll ever need that long. It's a little slow, but it's also doing it all in one API request. Whereas OpenAI, like I said, it's 4 different APIs that you're jumping through hoops, transferring that thread ID back and forth. So I like this approach a little better. But yeah, it is just a little bit slower. Let's see here another second or two. We should have first response back. So give it a few more seconds here. There we go. So you'll see we get back the response ID. You get the text itself. That's like the response from the AI. And then there's the array of the chat history. You're also getting the finish reason. So, if it timed out or if you're using streaming, then, you might be getting something back, but it's not finished yet. It gives you an idea of the tokens that were used each time and then these citations. This is pretty cool. So if you enable the web search and you ask something that needs that, you can get it to give you back links, actual like sources for each citation. So I think that's about it that we're actually going to need for this one. There's a few different formats here. Snippets. It took a snippet from the web search here. So under the documents array, it's given us back the raw text from the area that it used to answer. And then it's summarized this. So there's a lot of info coming back with this example. But we've got the basics working, so we're able to send that request. Now what I want to do is update the body here. So that we can send our own message. But first, we should actually convert this to a data source because I've got this bearer token right here in plain text in the header. So you want to save this as a data source to move this to a secure field and get it out of the app. Right now, it's stored in the app definition. So I'm going to save as data source, and then we will cut this key from here and move it down to the bearer token. And then I can delete this header. And I'm going to leave the other two because I think that's always going to apply in this case. You may want to remove it with other APIs and add those in per API, but this will apply every time now. Let's go ahead and name this. Okay. So now you'll see this blue bar around the URL. And if you look at the headers, you can tell there's 2 inherited and still view those that are plain text ones, but that third one that's part of the API key, it doesn't show that at all because that's in a secure field. It is encrypted and it stays on the server. but it is there. So if we run this one more time, it should still be working. But the key is not in the Appsmith app anymore. And like I said, it is a little slow, but it's better than sending 4 different API requests. Okay, so that much is working now. Let's go ahead and start with the UI so that we can interact with this. I'm going to add a table so we can look at the chat history. And then we will connect this to the response here, and it looks like it found it directly, the chat history. So when you go to bind this to any API request like that, you'll have a .data every time. Every API is always going to have a .data, and then depending on the format of that API, it can come back with the records nested in an array, and some APIs have multiple, multiple arrays of things coming back. Like here we have chat history. Then we got an object. Citations is another array, right? So that one could be displayed in the table, which is nested, and there's another array here. So just look at the structure of your data. It's usually going to find it, but yeah, that's just picking the first array, and it happened to be the one we wanted. So, all right, we got a list of our previous chat here, and now we need a way to send a new message. So I'm going to use input widget, and then we'll add a button for sending it. All right, just change the label on here. Then we can go back to the query here, and let's look at the API docs on what's the required fields again. Now it says you need the message every time, but the chat history and the chat ID are both optional, and you can use one or the other actually. So if you want to preload it with that history, like the example here has, then you can give it an array of messages with a role of either user or chatbot, and then what the message was. Or if you want to insert a conversation ID, you can pull up a previous conversation if you have its ID. The cool thing is you can just include a new ID. You can just make one up and say that this is the ID I want to use for this chat. And then going forward, you can keep interacting with that thread, giving it that conversation ID. So it's like the thread ID in OpenAI. Okay. So just kind of looking over the different options here to, give you ideas for your use case. But I think for ours, I'm going to just totally remove the chat history and only send that message, get it down to the minimum required fields, and then you can add on to that for specific use cases. Do you want to use the connector for, scanning a certain website or a PDF or whatever it is? So let's take the chat history. We'll get rid of that. I think I'll leave the connector for the web search, but if you want, you can also give this a URL to ground it. I'm not going to do that part, but if you want to enable web search but keep it locked down to one site, you can do that as well. And just to make this message dynamic here, I'm going to wrap the whole thing in mustache syntax so I can just be able to use JavaScript wherever. And right here, we'll reference that new input widget text. Okay, so we don't have any text in it yet. Now we want to make that send button run this API and grab this input text here. So here's the send button on click, and we will have it execute that send message, and that's it. It's crazy how simple this API is. Like you don't have to run the GET request after or chain anything together. So you just send the message and that's it. I'm going to refresh this because we have this old chat history in here. So I want to start a new chat, and we're not giving it an ID, so it'll be starting a new thread. Let's see. Let's see what it knows about Appsmith. Okay, now that's a little longer than will fit in the table widget. So I'm going to enable the cell wrapping on that one column for the message. So table widget actually works out pretty good for this because it'll it'll make each row auto height based on the content there without taking up more than it needs. So you can do the same with the list widget, but the rows won't resize. So they're all going to be huge or they're all going to cut off, or you got to kind of pick one or the other. So I think the table works better for this. We don't need to see this whole top bar section though. So you can hide all that by hiding the individual settings. If we turn off pagination and download and filter, there we go. So that'll just kind of clean it up a little bit. And then if you want, just kind of for looks, make the role slightly different here so that, the focus is more on the text one there. All right, well, that's the basics. We have a chatbot that we're able to send a question to. Let's see if it's conversational as far as remembering the last part of the message, because we're not giving it a thread ID right now, or a conversation ID in this case. So if I don't say Appsmith, let's just see if it remembers the thread. Does it support? So if I'm not telling it what we're talking about, just to see if it's remembering the context. I know with OpenAI, if you already have a thread ID, like you have to create the thread first and give it that ID, and so that is your context. But right now, I'm not giving it a thread ID, so is it going to know what we're talking about? Don't think it will, but I know it's an easy fix. So just a quick test here. It may be taking a while because it doesn't know how to respond right now. Okay, so we got the timeout. It doesn't know what it is because we don't have a conversation history that I sent with it or a conversation ID to look it up. So let's go back to the query here. And one of the options that we can include in that body is a conversation ID. And I'm just going to hard code it to one value for now. And then you can do this however you want. The user could give it a name. You could use a UUID generator. We have UUID.js here in the recommended libraries. If you just go to the plus here, and then there it is. So you can use this library to generate an ID if you need to. Right now, I just want to see if it remembers this context. So I've got the ID there, but I want to start over because I already got one message. So we'll refresh one more time, start from scratch. Okay. So we'll try the same two questions here. The first one worked, but then the second time around, it didn't have that context. So hopefully this time the two will be linked and it can answer that second question. Okay, well, we got back a couple versions of the user. Let's see, data sources. Oh, I think I used this ID before. Test one in another. Okay. Yeah, that's giving me responses from a few days ago. That's why was so confused for a minute. I used the ID test one a while ago. All right, let's try. There we go. One more time, I'm going to refresh this. All right. Okay, now we've only got two messages. So it's a brand new thread. Asked it to tell me about Appsmith. What data sources does it support? Now, these don't have to be sequential. Like you just saw, I pulled up a previous thread. I reused the thread ID that I had tested the other day, and it picked up right where it left off. So if you wanted, you could create those thread IDs, conversation IDs. Sorry, I'm used to OpenAI, but you could save those conversation IDs and pull it back up later for a different user, or a different session the next time that user comes back, and let them resume those chats. So pretty cool setup. Let's give it another second here. We should have a response. There it is. Okay, what data sources does it support? Appsmith integrates with. Cool. So you can see that from one message to the next, if you don't give it a conversation ID or a chat history, then it's just starting fresh. It has no context, does not remember that last question, but you give it an ID and you don't actually have to give it the entire history. It's keeping track of that history for you and responding with it. So if we check out the most recent response now, you always have the text, which is the last response, and it's outside of the array. For convenience, you don't have to go into the array and find the right message. It's just right here at the top level of the object. But on top of that, you also have the chat history, and then that's going to be in there as well. So that if you want to display it all in an array, it'll include that one. But if you want to display just the last response, you don't have to mess with going through the array. They put it right at the top level. So I think that's it for this week. That's everything I wanted to cover. This is just our first look at integrating with Cohere. We've got a few other integrations planned. So if you have ideas for future ones or any questions on this one, feel free to drop a comment below. Thanks again for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.